In this example, I want to go ahead and launch Ubuntu Linux Ec2 instance. And the reason I want to do that is I want to show you a development environment that includes Node, which is going to allow us to install React. And then we should be able to create our first React application on this Ec2 instance. I'm not doing it from my host operating system because I want to show you the components that are necessary to get our React application up and running. So I'm going to go ahead and launch an Ec2 instance. And it's going to be the free tier Ubuntu instance. So I'm just going to go ahead and search for Ubuntu. And I'm looking for the free tier eligible. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and select. And I'm ready to review and launch it. I'm going to create a new key pair so that I can connect to this. So I'm going to call this my React setup. I'm just going to save that on my desktop. And then I'm going to launch that instance. So it's going to take a second for that instance to launch. We should be able to go back over to Ec2 to see that that instance is coming up. So if I go to my instances, here it is, and I'm going to have public DNS. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that to my clipboard. I'm going to go ahead and open up a terminal window. And what I want to do is I want to connect to that Ec2 instance. So I want to be able to do an SSH. So I'm actually changing my working directory to my desktop because that's where I downloaded that key file. Then I should be able to use SSH-I, React setup, and then Ubuntu at my public DNS entry. And what's going to happen is this instance is still initializing, so it's not going to allow me to access it. And it also tells me that my key file has bad permissions, so I have to change the permissions to 400 on that React setup key. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then if I try to SSH into that Ec2 instance, you'll see that I'm now connected. Okay, so life is actually good there. What I want to do is I'm going to go out to my browser, and what I want to do is a node install. Okay, so I could download it, and it tells me that there's long-term support for most users, or kind of the latest and greatest. It tells me for a Mac, because that's my host operating system, but I don't want that, so I'm going to go to the download section. And then there's different installers. And what I want to do is I actually want to install Node via a package manager. So I'm going to go ahead and click that option. And the option that I'm looking for is Debian and Ubuntu-based Linux distributions. And eventually, it tells me, here's another link from NodeSource. Okay, and then it walks me through all the different variations of installing Node. So if I want Node 13x, which I don't, I want the long-term support version, I want the 12x version, it shows me how to do this using Ubuntu. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these commands. So here's the first command, that curl command. I'm going to go back over to my terminal, and I'm on that Ubuntu. I'm on that Ubuntu instance, so I'm going to go ahead and install it. Okay, and what that really does is it basically adds a package source. So it says this is where you can grab packages from. So I'm setting that up, and I don't know which version I actually grabbed. Did I grab the 13? I think I got the right version. So 12x, yep. And then what I want to do is I want to install Node.js now. So I just copied and pasted those commands. And this video is showing you how to use React a little bit, like kind of the prerequisites that we're going to need for React, and then we're going to create a simple React application and start it up. And really, this video is kind of a prerequisite for us using code pipeline. So the idea is that we're going to build a React application that we're going to put into the code pipeline, which we want to create and build on using kind of the same process. So these same things that we did to install Node, it's going to be important that we remember these commands, or at least remember what we did for these commands, so that we can come back later and put these commands into our code pipeline, so that when I'm building a React application, I have a prerequisite of I need Node. Okay, and when I install Node, so Node is installed right now, what it does is it also installs npm, and it also has a package called create react app. Okay, so that create react app, so if I just do a Google search for create react app, and I look in here, then what you'll see is there's these commands that you can use to create a React app. So npx create react app, my app, cd my app, npm start. So those are the commands that we're going to need to start our first React app. So if I use npx create react app, and then I'm just going to call it my app just like they did, but this is my application name. Okay, what it's going to do is it's going to create that application called my app in my current working directory, which is fine in this case. Okay, so it's going to take some time to create that React app. When I create the React app, it also installs some Node components, and it also creates a git ignore file. And the reason that's important is because React requires some npm modules, and the reality is I don't want to manage the source code for those npm modules. I don't want to include that with my source code. What I want to do is I want to note that there's a dependency on the node module, but I am not in charge of maintaining that node module. So I do not want that as part of my source code. I just want the dependency as part of my source code. And that's where that package.json file is going to come into play. So if we see our React app when this gets created, there's a package.json file. That's going to note all of our node package dependencies. And that's all I really need. I don't actually need the source code for those dependencies. I can always download that later. Okay. So this create react app script is running. It initialized a Git repository, so there's a local Git repository here. This is not committing our source code out to GitHub, but that automatically happens with that React create app, or create react app, sorry. And eventually this is going to get installed. And what's going to happen is I want to change my working directory over to that new application that I created. And then the npm start actually starts a Node web server to run your React application. Okay, so now I'm going to change my working directory, and then I can start up my application. So npm start. Okay, so it tells me it's starting a development server. Takes a second here. And you'll see what's happening is that my React application's running on port 3000. Okay, so my React application is not running on a traditional port. It's not running on port 80. So instead of giving an IP address to access my site, I'm going to access my site using port 3000. Okay, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come out to EC2. Right now I have my inbound rules and my outbound rules. I'm just going to go into the security group and change the inbound rules. And here's my inbound rules. to scroll down a little bit so I can see those. Okay, so right now it's going to allow SSH to be an inbound port. I want to edit my inbound rules. So right now SSH is there. I want to add another, which is custom TCP, and I want that on port 3000. And again, just kind of going through the rules here so I can allow traffic to come into my web server on port 3000. Okay, so now if I go back over to my instances, I have this public DNS entry. I'm going to go out to my browser. That's the DNS entry that I want, and then I want to access my site on port 3000. So that's what that :3000 at the end is. Okay, and you'll notice here's my React app. Okay, so this is sitting on that Ubuntu server in EC2. So right now I've created this JavaScript application. It's written in React, and it's running on that Ec2 instance. It's using a development server, so it's not actually compiled source code. So React is really cool because it's HTML and JavaScript, and that's important because it's not a compiled piece of code, and it's not executed on the server, it's executed on the client. And why that's important is because, from my perspective, React is a perfect candidate to then be hosted inside of S3. Okay, so if I look at my development application, though, there's all sorts of node packages, and it becomes kind of a pain to work with. So it's really hard to deploy to S3. However, I kind of cheated that process a little bit, and you'll notice that there's some commands here, this Npm Run Build. So what ends up happening is, let's actually look at the source code for a second. So if I do a directory listing, there's node modules, there's this package, lock.json, package.json, and then there's my source code. So if I go into my source code and look, there's a couple of JavaScript files, a couple of CSS files, the service worker, there's tests, and if I go into my node modules, so I'm just going up a directory and go into my node modules, there's all sorts of node modules that were required to get React running, right? Like, this is a ridiculous amount of stuff to get running. Okay, so I can't deploy that to an end user's browser. So instead, what I'll do is I'll do that command. So if I scroll up to the top, you use Npm Run Build. So I'm just going to use Npm Run Build. And what this is doing is it's creating a minimalist JavaScript application. It's creating an optimized production build saying, hey, I don't need all of those node modules. And now if I look at this, in the build folder, it has my HTML file, a couple images, a couple of JavaScript files, but this is what I would actually deploy. That's the output of my React application. Okay, so why this is important is because ultimately what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to build my source code in React. I want to commit it to GitHub. And when I commit it to GitHub, I want to kick off a code pipeline so that my code pipeline will make sure that I have Node installed, because Node's a requirement for React. And then I can actually build my application. So I'm going to use that Npm Run Build. So I can build my React application. So I get this HTML, couple images, couple JavaScript files, couple CSS files. I'm going to get that compiled output that I can then deploy over to an S3 bucket. And my actual website can be running on S3. So I can run my React application on S3, and I want to build that all through Code Pipeline. Okay, so the reason for this video is not to teach you React, but to kind of show you the requirements for getting React up and running. And that's going to be important within our code pipeline. So if we can't get those requirements fulfilled, then our code pipeline is not going to work. If I don't have npm and node installed, then I'm not going to be able to create a React app and deploy my React app. I'm not going to be able to use that Npm Run Build. So I'm not going to be able to do the things that I need to do in order to get a React application running through code pipeline. So this video is all about kind of the prerequisite dependencies that React has.